Efficient remedies. We mentioned that injunction is the usual remedy for breach of a property right. We like to explain this generalization as well as exceptions to it in terms of efficiency. The preceding example showed that damages and injunctions are equally efficient remedies when transaction costs equal zero. Consequently, differences in efficiency must depend on transaction costs. If transaction costs are so high as to preclude bargaining, then the more efficient remedy is damages, not injunctions. The reason that damages are more efficient than injunctions when transaction costs preclude bargaining is easy to see from the example of the laundry and electric company. If damages perfectly compensate the laundry, its profits remain the same, specifically $300, regardless of whether the electric company pollutes. So the laundry is indifferent between the damage and injunction remedies, assuming no bargaining. Under the damage remedy, the electric company can pollute and pay damages, or it can abate and not pay damages. Its profits increase from $500 to $800 when it pollutes and pays damages rather than abating. In in contrast, an injunction with no bargaining removes this choice. Specifically, the injunction forces the electric company to abate, in which case its profits are $500. In general, when transaction costs preclude bargaining, a switch in remedy from injunctions to compensatory damages makes the victim no worse off, whereas the injurer may be better off and cannot be worse off. In the example of the laundry and electric company, a switch makes the electric company strictly better off. According to Table 4.5, the non cooperative solution yields $800 to the electric company under a damage remedy and $500 under an injunction, whereas the laundry enjoys $300 in either case. We have explained the superiority of the damages remedy when transaction costs are high. What about the converse proposition? Are injunctions the superior remedy when transaction costs are low? The traditional answer, which we will explain, is yes. Earlier, we noted that bargaining tends to succeed when the legal rights of the parties are clear and simple. Injunction is traditionally regarded as clearer and simpler than damages because the determination of damages by courts can be unpredictable. To illustrate, it is difficult for a court to assign monetary value to the damage caused by the Windsong satellites straying into the orbit of Orbitcom's satellite in example 2. Similarly, it is difficult for a court to assign monetary value to the damage caused by the intrusion of Potatoes' house onto 2 feet of Parsley's land in example 5. In contrast, the right to an injunction gives the parties a clear position from which to bargain. In the course of bargaining, they may establish the value of the damage themselves. Thus, the traditional argument concludes that the injunctive remedy is more efficient than damages when the parties can bargain with each other. We have reached the conclusion of a famous article by Judge, then Professor Guido Calabresi, and a Douglas Malamud, who proposed the following rules for determining the best remedy for violating a legal right. Where there are few obstacles to cooperation, that is, low transaction costs, the more efficient remedy is to enjoin the defendant's interference with the plaintiff's property. Where there are obstacles to cooperation, that is, high transaction costs, the more efficient remedy is to award compensatory money damages. Superscript 20, it reads Calabresi and Melland, property rights, liability rules, and inalienability. One view of the Cathedral, 85 Harvard Law Review, 1089, year 1972. As the title indicates, the authors consider a third method of encouraging the efficient use of property, inalienability, the forbidding of a bargaining solution to the use of a property right. We discuss the efficiency of that method briefly in the next chapter. Most property disputes involve small numbers of uh, contiguous landowners. Communication costs are low. The parties can monitor conformity to their agreements, and neighbors can take a long run view towards each other, which limits opportunism and strategic behavior. Bargaining is likely to be successful in these circumstances. According to the preceding prescription, the usual remedy in property disputes ought to be injunctive relief, and that is the law in fact. Some property disputes, however, involve large numbers of people. As the numbers increase, communication costs rise, monitoring becomes difficult, and short sighted behavior increases. Private bargaining is unlikely to succeed in disputes involving a large number of geographically dispersed strangers, such as disputes over uh, nuisances like air pollution and the stench from the feedlot in example 3. According to the preceding prescription, the usual remedy in nuisance suits with large numbers of people should be damages. Chapter 5 explains that some courts have followed this principle and others have not. The two preceding rules constitute the traditional prescription in law and economics to choose between damages and injunctive remedies. In most cases, the traditional prescription suffices, but more careful thinking about information has refined it. When a person's activity spills over and affects the other property owners, the court needs different information depending on whether its remedy is damages or injunction. When transaction costs obstruct bargaining, creating efficient incentives by awarding damages requires the court to measure the harm correctly. If the court mismeasures the harm, damages will be set too high or too low, which will distort the injurer's incentives. Chapter 6 explains this point in detail. Alternatively, when transaction costs obstruct bargaining, creating efficient incentives requires the court to know which party values the right to the most in order to decide between an injunction and no injunction. Superscript 21, which reads the court knows the relative values of the entitlement if the unobservable elements of individual valuations correlates positively with the observable elements. See Lewis Kaplan and Stephen Chevelle, Property Rules versus Liability Rules, The Economic Analysis, 109, Harvard Law Review, 715, year 1996. But see Ian Ayres and Paul Goldbart, Correlative Values and the Theory of Property and Liability Rules, 32 J. Legal Study, STUD. 121, year 2003, rejecting the correlated values claim that liability rules cannot harness private information when the disputants' values are correlated. If the, back to the text, if the electric company values the right to pollute more than a laundry values the right to be free from pollution, then the court should allow the electric company to pollute and refuse the laundry's request for an injunction. Conversely, if the laundry values the right to be free from pollution more than the electric company's values the right to pollute, the court should grant the laundry's request for an injunction against the electric company's pollution. In some, when transaction costs obstruct bargaining, what the court should do depends on what it knows. The court must know the absolute value of the harm caused by a spillover in order to provide efficient incentives by a damage remedy. The court needs to know the relative value of the spillover in order to achieve efficiency by the injunctive remedy. Now we can restate the first prescription's refinement. When transaction costs preclude bargaining, the court should protect a right by an injunctive remedy if it knows which party values the right relatively more, even if it does not know how much either party values the right absolutely. Conversely, the court should protect a right by a damage remedy if it knows how much one of the parties values the right absolutely, even if it does not know which party values the right relatively more. The second prescription, award an injunction when low transaction costs permit bargaining, also requires qualification in light of problems of information. This prescription assumes that voluntary exchange of a right occurs more easily when it is protected by an injunction, because the injunctions are simpler and clearer than damages. While this is usually true, it is not always so. In bargaining, what matters is cost, not physics. No matter how clear the injunction, the cost of complying with it may be unclear. To lubricate bargaining, each party needs to know the other's threat value or go it alone value. Injunctions do not solve the problem that private information about costs and values inhibits bargaining. To illustrate, the injunction for the electric company to stop polluting is clear, but the cost to the electric company of complying, which may or may not be clear to the electric company, is unclear to the laundry. The truth is more equivocal than the traditional analysis suggests. With the injunctive remedy, the obstacle to private agreement includes the plaintiff's uncertainty about the defendant's costs of complying with the court order. Conversely, with the damage remedy, the obstacle to private agreement includes the defendant's uncertainty about the money value of the plaintiff's harm. Superscript 22. It reads, taking these arguments into account leads to a more convincing version of the second rule, where there are few obstacles to cooperating, i.e., low transaction costs. The more efficient remedy is the award of an injunction when the plaintiff can estimate the defendant's compliance costs uh, more readily than the defendant can estimate the plaintiff's damages. Question 4.13. Use the theory of transaction costs to justify protecting the following rights by injunction or damages. A, B, C, and D. A reads, a landowner's right to exclude from his property a neighbor's gas line. B, a new car owner's right to have the car's defective transmission replaced by the seller. C, a homeowner's right to be free from air pollution by a nearby factory. D, a spouse's right to half of the house on divorce. Question 4.14. Suppose that two people choose to litigate a dispute. Should the law presume that if two parties are prepared to litigate, transaction transaction costs must be high? Therefore, the court should choose damages as the remedy, not an injunction. Webnote 4.2. There has been a surprising amount of recent scholarship on the Calabresi Mellum contention about the efficiency of remedies. We discuss much of that literature on our website, including looking at the empirical literature on whether the issuing of injunctions is typically followed by bargaining.